Welcome back to the Know Why podcast. Today I have Emily Harrison with me to talk about AI, specifically AI in the classroom. Does it help us or does it actually hurt? So I know this is a relevant topic for a lot of people. There may be teachers listening or people like me who have young kids and are wondering, what does the future of education look like now that we've got AI everywhere? And maybe even some students themselves, high schoolers or college, who are trying to think through this issue. So, Emily, I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to the Know Why podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on, Liberty. I'm really looking forward to talking with you today.
Yes, so let me introduce you a little bit. Emily writes the blog Dear Christian Parent, which you can find on Substack, and we'll link that here. She is a wife and mother of two and an ambassador for the Phone Free Schools movement and a 2024 Colson Fellow with the Colson Center for Christian Worldview. So, again, Emily, really thankful to have you on today. And I'm specifically asking you questions based on one of your articles, which was called AI and Students. You did a series of articles about AI, but you make this point that for generations raised on screens, the line between using tech as an aid in school and then using it to a point where it becomes cheating is really easily blurred for
Right.
students. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so kind of going back a little history of like screen time in schools. It feels like it's always been this way, but obviously we know it hasn't. So around 2012 is when adoption of what is called one-to-one programs really began. So that's kind of one device, typically a Chromebook or laptop for students. So one device per one student. Um, and So that was 2012. We now have an entire generation of kids who've gone through K through 12 education, and that's what they've known. So I have a friend who's a speech therapist, and she kind of told me this story one day about a young boy she was helping, and he had gotten the wrong answer on the math game that he was playing on his tablet. And he kind of resigned himself to being like, the computer said I was wrong, therefore I'm wrong.
Hmm.
He wasn't actually wrong. He had made one small math error, and because of that, it messed up his answer. Kind of 2 + 2 = 4 instead of 2 + 2 = 7 or whatever he had said. I can't remember. Um, but I think that kids are so caught in relying on technology for schoolwork that that line of where it becomes cheating and where it becomes just an application that they're being told they have to use by
Mm,
teachers and parents, it just gets really, really blurry. So,
yeah.
I mean, how do kids start research, right? How do we all start research now? We go to Google.
Hmm.
So
What's a
I
library?
that's how we treat our library, right? So
Yeah.
if you kind of Google, I did this the other day, I was like, well, what happens if I want to do a project on, a barn owl? Let's
Hmm.
just, it kind of sounds like a normal project any student could do at varying levels of difficulty. When you get in there, the first responses you get came from YouTube, Instagram, Wikipedia.
Hmm.
Not what somebody who's done actual research would say are good sources, right?
Right.
They're not those primary source materials like going to a book and getting National Geographic or something like that. So kids aren't learning those skills. So then all of a sudden what ends up populating out is AI responses.
Hmm.
It's so familiar. I think so many kids don't realize where that line is, and they're not being instructed
Hmm.
in that way.
Yeah, that is so helpful to think about. And I know it can be frustrating maybe from a teacher's perspective. I taught for a little while and I didn't run into the AI issue, but I was starting to hear about it. And if I had continued teaching at a higher level, I think I would have run into it more.
Mhm.
But I remember being like, oh my gosh, like that would be so frustrating as a teacher. But we do have to, like you said, realize where kids have come from and like they've been inundated with tech and the internet and everything. So, yeah, that is a hard line. But if we're helping them think through this, say you have a student, your kid or someone says, well, why can't I use AI or can I use AI to say proofread my paper or check my math homework? Because w- I might ask my parent or even a peer to check it or give feedback. So what is there a difference there? Like, where do we draw that line?
Right. I think that is really such a key issue. And I think speaking to students about that and teachers and parents too, is how we're going to kind of get a handle on this. Um, the difference here is if you were asking, say you had a math assignment to do, right? And you know your older brother is a star math student, but you know your dad really hates math, right? Who are you going to ask to go check that assignment?
Hmm.
Your older brother,
Yeah.
right? Who you know is a trustworthy authority on what it is you're doing. And so kids are going to AI thinking it's a trustworthy authority, and it's not.
Hmm.
We know that AI is prone to what they call hallucinations. So you're just getting information that's not factual. On math, this seems a little easier, but let's now talk about maybe like the fall of the Roman Empire,
Hmm.
right? That is what led up to that, why it happened, all the things that kind of were coming to bear can be really prone to a lot of opinion, not necessarily always fact. And what we're seeing, what the studies about AI, especially on the college level, are showing is that students who use AI, who are experts in their field, can actually really benefit from the synthesizing of material.
Hmm.
When you are not an expert, like most students aren't,
Hmm.
because they're still students,
Yeah.
you're not understanding what is trustworthy and what isn't.
Mm.
So it's where we need to have students going back to primary source materials, secondary source materials, when available. Obviously, history, it kind of varies as things go along, but you've got to have that sense of authority. You're also the way students learn, the way all of us learn. If you are sitting down to do your math assignment or to do this history paper with somebody who knows more than you do, you're having that dialogue and you are sharpening your skills. You're having to think through it. If you take your paper or your math assignment and you just plug it into an AI application and it comes back and tells you what to do, you take that as the gold standard and you move along.
Hmm.
You're not having to think and work and process through. Just the fact of picking up a dictionary to look up a word, it's more laborious than using spell check, but it actually aids in learning.
Hmm.
If we want students who are learning how to learn, we've got to really pull back from use of AI, in so many ways.
Yeah. I really like how you explain that because yeah, not being raised with AI, I feel
Right,
like intuitively I'm kind of like, well, I wouldn't ask AI to do that. But because I write professionally, and there are lots of times where even on like Microsoft Word, it'll underline something, and I'm like, no, like it doesn't know what it's talking about.
right,
But if it was something that I didn't know about, then and I was still a student learning something like in a field I didn't know, then I wouldn't know what was when it was making a mistake or having bias
right.
or something. So
Kinda
that's
you
such a good
you
point.
don't know what you don't know, and
Yeah.
that's where all students are, and that's fine. That's why they're students. Yeah.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah. So I've heard, I think everybody's just figuring this out. And so I've heard, like, on some videos and things that I've seen, some professors saying, we really can't beat AI. They're going to use it anyways. We already know that students are using AI to turn in, like, write papers. So we need to just make it part of the process. For instance, have them use AI to write their paper and then they have to edit that, or have AI write a paper and now they have to argue against it on the other side, but like work
Mhm.
it into the assignment somehow or into the process. So I'm curious to see what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, I get that pull. I understand that to a point, but again, we're talking about students, and I mean, I'm talking elementary school to college on this. We don't do that in other areas, right? We don't hand second graders calculators and go, now you know everything you need to know about math.
Hmm.
As long as the calculator says it, we can do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, as students are still learning and still going through the process of what it means to learn, relying on AI isn't teaching them how to build, interact, use AI in a meaningful way. It's just teaching them how to not be a part of human connection,
Hmm.
right? So this same principle that you applied, why not have the professor write the paper first and the students argue against that. Why not do this peer to peer? The other thing that kind of comes down to it is, where does AI get all of its source material?
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you have students in a room and you go, here's 7 books, go write a paper, and then you guys are going to argue it out. You verified that source material at the outset as the teacher,
Mm-hmm.
because you're guiding your students towards good resources. When you're using AI, we don't know all the things that are going into building these AI platforms.
Yeah.
We don't know what's coming at it. A lot of these things are learning kind of in real time. So anything that's happening on AI platforms can also influence what students are being told. So it's not really flexing the skill of research. And at the same time, one of the things that we really right now are lacking in culture is the ability to disagree,
Yeah,
right?
that's
I
true.
mean, we disagree a lot, don't get me wrong, but we're
Mm-hmm.
not disagreeing well, and we're
Right.
not doing that with discourse, and that is just vital to, like, a republic.
Mm-hmm.
But we've got to be teaching students. So if you're teaching a student how to argue with AI, that doesn't really give them any skills. But if you're teaching them how to argue and defend their point with another student or with their professor, they're learning a valuable skill while also maybe learning about the Roman Empire. So you're kind of two birds, one stone. And I think it's kind of this, one person sharpens another kind of idea. And if you go back, like, think Continental Congress, right? You've got Washington, Jefferson, Hamilton, Franklin, all these guys, Adams in there debating out some really, really important stuff,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because of all of that debate and disagreement, we have a system of government that's still working 200 plus years later. We want to still be training kids to be able to have those kinds of debates, because the kinds of debates that are coming are related to how we're using AI and other technologies in society. So we need to be flexing those skills for students among embodied community.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good point. And I love how it's all integrated because I think if you asked some people, like, is it okay to have an AI best friend or an AI therapist, which I know that some schools are starting to introduce programs like that, or an AI boyfriend, people are a little bit more, I don't know, like they have an intuition that, like, that's not right. We don't want it to
Right.
replace our relationships, but that's something you don't really, a lot of people may not think about, even in the learning process in the classroom. That's not just academic learning, but social learning as
Mhm.
well. And yeah, that's such a good point.
Yeah, I mean, we want kids who can disagree with somebody and still be kind,
Mm-hmm.
right? That you can disagree with someone and still learn how to interact and work with them. We want this in our workplaces.
Mm-hmm.
We certainly don't want workplaces where every time there's a disagreement, people are flying off in anger. So we have to teach kids how to be able to manage this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you can't you can't learn to argue in a healthy way with a computer.
No.
But I think, we've already been exploring this, but really it comes down to like teaching kids, like we want to teach them certain facts in school, obviously, but we're also teaching them how to think. And
Right.
it seems like I and screens kind of inhibit that
Mhm.
process.
Indeed.
I know that another argument is it's not that kids are losing skills necessarily. Maybe they're losing a certain kind of skill, but they're gaining all these other skills, like a different skill set than prior generations because they're digital natives.
Right.
They're being raised in an environment where they do have smartphones, AI technology. And it's kind of like, not everybody knows how to go out and plow a field anymore, but we don't need to know that. We like have advanced technology and processes now. And so, it's okay that they are digital natives because they're just technology experts. Is that a misconception or do you think, okay,
So the story
talk
goes,
about
they're
that.
technological experts. What we're actually seeing through surveys, their Career Builder has one, is that employers are looking at college graduates and saying that they lack technological skills.
Mhm.
So these kids who have grown up swiping and tapping don't have basic building blocks of how to use technology. So just looking at AI on its own, AI is built through Word documents. Well, it doesn't have to be Microsoft Word, but word processing and spreadsheets.
Mm-hmm.
In most schools now, we aren't teaching how to utilize those two programs. So we kind of maybe use a really, really scaled back version of Google platforms, but now we've got lawsuits being brought against Google for not protecting student data. So like that's a whole problem in and of itself, but we're not teaching kids how to type. So learning how to type takes approximately 400 hours to become an expert at. And so when we're not teaching kids these basic building blocks of how to type, how to use Word, how to use spreadsheets, which I mean, nobody ever got addicted to these devices, right? But nobody ever sat down to a spreadsheet and figured out how to use it on their own. These are things that need to be explicitly taught to students. And when we're not doing that, we're not actually growing their technological skills. So now they go into the workplace. And like you said, maybe we don't need to go out and plow our fields, by hand anymore, but we need to use pretty technologically advanced software to run a combine
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
or to repair that combine. And kids aren't technologically astute enough to figure out how to interact with different kinds of software because they don't have that base of knowledge to draw upon.
Mm.
So if fixing that is just swiping and tapping, that's one thing, but it's not. That's not how these software programs are set up, and that's just not what you see kind of across various, professional jobs. So we've got to get back to the basic building blocks of actually teaching these skills. I mean, we've been typing for like 150 years. It hasn't changed.
Mm-hmm.
But now we are graduating kids who don't know how to.
Wow. I
Um,
didn't even know that.
yeah. So, and I think that this is where we're seeing on the high school and collegiate level more cheating with AI is because kids haven't been able to type. So if you've got to type a, 5-paragraph essay, but you've never developed the skill of typing, that is really laborious when you're
Yeah.
still hunt and peck or slowly doing it. So it can take longer to type than it can to write your words and your thoughts down on paper, but you've got to submit it online. And it is hours long process of doing that. So I've heard of parents who just type the paper for their kids because their kids can't type
Mm.
in on the high school level. But if you don't have that type of parent oversight, going to AI, and maybe you would say that that's cheating too, is letting your parents type. I will let you work that out in your own house. But going to AI to copy and paste stuff is pretty easy when it's so difficult to because you don't have these basic building blocks. So
Mm.
again, you just have to build that knowledge. And I think we've really been sold a bill of goods that these are digital natives. They are not nearly as technologically astute as we think they are, or maybe as much as they think they are either.
Wow. Yeah. 'Cause that's something I've never really thought about. Um, but I liked kind of where we went with the comparison with like the combine or whatever. I feel like even in the old days, if you were using a piece of equipment, you had to know how to repair it. Like you had
Right.
to know the ins and outs of, if the wheel falls off your wagon or, and it's like we have become more and more reliant on this super complex technology, but we don't know how to use it. But only the people who are making it know how to use it, and we're just relying on it. And that's actually kind of scary if
It
you think
it
about
is
it.
scary. And those are the conversations that kind of takes me back to like the Continental Congress. Like those are the conversations we need to be having in society. Is this something we want to push into, and do we want to relinquish this much control over our day-to-day lives
Hmm. Wow.
to these big companies?
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Um,
There's a
so
lot. It's so much. We could go for hours.
yeah, and it really, I mean, it applies across the board. I mean, I know people are probably aware of like certain complaints about the big technology companies or social media companies having bias. But I mean, it really just comes down to who's in power and it'll affect anybody. And you've got one person or one group of people who are thinking a certain way.
Mm.
And if they're in control, then they can control the information that you receive. And even more so if you don't know how to go out and do your own, work and research
Right.
on things. So
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
So this has so many implications, for society at large and for the future. But as you're pointing out, it really does start with kids and in the classroom and how they're being taught and how they're being raised. So, how should teachers and administrators proceed? Like, what are some ways that we can mitigate the harmful effects of this?
Yeah, so I've been a part of Fair Play Screen Time Action Network since 2017, 2018. And so we've seen a lot of growth in this area as far as trying to educate teachers on the role of technology within the classroom. And one really bright point that we can't claim any control over, but so in Sweden, they are actually rolling back these one-to-one programs. They are saying we're seeing increasing learning loss. So, and if we look at kind of our nation's report card, we are seeing the rates of students who are actually proficient in reading and math continue to fall year over year over year.
Hmm.
And this has happened since about 2012, which was the year that we started these one-to-one programs. Um, if you speak to teachers who have taken the time to remove a lot of these devices from their classroom, they are seeing better classroom management. They're seeing better behavior out of students. They're seeing increased learning, increased engagement. Screen time promises a lot of engagement, but it's really kind of obsession with the screen because they're so just demanding of our attention in the way that they're designed. So for teachers on the K3 or K through 8 level, my recommendation based upon the research is to completely remove these devices. Go back to pencil and paper. A lot of times teachers maybe don't have the control to do that as much as administrators or school boards do. But that's something that we can have teachers certainly speaking up for. And as available, they can be doing this within their own classrooms. This is what Sweden's doing. So they are now requiring one book per class per student and a return to pencil and paper learning.
Wow.
And they've kind of just rolled that out, and I think they're going to be releasing more information on that in May. So it's happening in that sense. A return to handwriting. Handwriting, it helps you get your thoughts on paper. It helps you think more clearly. It helps you stay organized, writing notes.
Hmm.
As you're handwriting notes versus typing notes, so you do know how to type. You are having to, you can, a proficient typer can record a lot more words than a proficient handwriter. So when you're handwriting, you're having to do a lot more thinking
Hmm.
about what it is you're writing, and you're having to do a lot more synthesizing of material. So if we're returning that, we're getting our kids to be thinking along the process. I also say kids need to learn how to do research the good old fashioned way as an embodied experience. It's kind of going back to the barn owl. You know, if you learn this is a trustworthy source, National Geographic, the Audubon Society, pamphlets that are maybe put out by your local Parks and Rec or something like that. If you're kind of going back to the source material, you're going to be better prepared to do internet research and
Hmm.
better prepared to kind of suss out differences of what you're seeing. So those are the big things that I kind of recommend on that level. We're seeing a lot of professors on the collegiate level just say no to having devices in their classroom.
Hmm.
No laptops, no phones, nothing. So we need to be thinking on the K-12 level, how are we best preparing our students to go into those classrooms where they can't rely on the technology that they've
Yeah.
been using? Um, Technology certainly has its place. I'm not advocating that we never teach our kids how to use this stuff, but we need to be teaching computer skills
Yeah.
more than anything else.
Wow. Those are great. And I will just say personally that on the handwriting thing, I've told students this before, but I have to write so many things for work every month, and I almost always start out handwriting first. And
Right.
I never even, and I've learned more about it in my adulthood about like what it does with your brain, but just intuitively, it's like if I sit there at a computer screen and look, I'll be like, writer's block. Like, I don't know, but I start handwriting, and all of a sudden I have so many ideas that now I have to go to the computer so I can type them. And then
Right.
it's so neat to see like research kind of
I just did a
backing that
really
up.
big workup there's a school that I am kind of helping craft some technology policies for. And so I've got like a whiteboard behind me that
Hmm.
just has tons and tons of things. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so good. So those are great tips for teachers, administrators, or even parents as they are thinking about like if with young kids, what kind of school environments do they want to
Mhm.
put their kids in the future?
Right.
Um, but let's say you've got a student who maybe they're in college or high school or grad school even, and they are becoming aware of this and they're like, I don't want to, you know, sacrifice my own learning process, but they're not in an environment that is really being careful about technology and AI.
Mhm.
Can they succeed? Can they kind of reclaim their own learning process without falling behind, in their environment? Like, what encouragement would you give them?
Specific to the collegiate level
Yeah, like an older, yeah, college, older student who doesn't
or high
want
school?
to use AI maybe or too much tech in their learning, but everybody around them is using it.
Yeah, so I would say move to the front of the classroom. I think that's just kind of an old teacher trick, right? If you're having trouble paying attention, go sit in the front so that you are not being distracted by all the other use of other
Yeah, that's
students.
good.
I mean, I hear from students all the time that the person next to them is sitting on their laptop just gambling, doing sports betting during class,
Mm,
or shopping on Amazon or whatever. So those things are just they're distracting. Move to the front of the class. Turn your phone off when you walk in. Don't or put it on airplane mode so that you're not kind of tempted to pick it up and be distracted by that. Go to the library, ask the librarian who's in there for help. How do I do research? What are all these books on all these shelves?
hmm
How can I kind of engage with that? I think a lot of students really don't go through that process and know. I think you can also ask your professor for accommodations. We are seeing lots of students asking for accommodations for a myriad of different reasons, and I think it's fine to say, I'd rather write this out by hand versus type it for my first draft, or my second draft. Can
mm,
you work with me on that? Go to your professor, tell them these things are distracting. There's a ton of different research studies out there right now. um, if you really kind of run into a roadblock with a professor, there's a study out of um, Duke that's pretty interesting. There's three or four others that have kind of been published in various journals, science and computer journal and stuff like that, that are all talking about the learning loss that happens from using AI when you're kind of not an expert in the field. So I would go talk to faculty. I think most students would be surprised at the level of support they're getting from faculty if they actually start asking.
right. Yeah, that's helpful to know. So, man, that we've covered so much in a short amount of time. And I know just I'm looking at your blog over here right now, like you have so many good resources and about AI, but just parenting in general and technology and all of that. So I definitely recommend checking out Emily's blog on Substack, Dear Christian Parent. But Emily, what other resources, books or articles or anything do you recommend for people who maybe want to think about this more?
Yeah, there's a lot. Neil Postman is kind of like the go-to that if you once you understand Neil Postman, a lot of this starts to make sense. The book that I would start with certainly is Amusing Ourselves to Death. I also really like From the Garden to the City by John Dyer. Gives us kind of just a good overview, especially for believers, for adherents to the Christian faith who are going, okay, how does technology fit into our lives? And I don't think we need to all run scared and go live in a cave. And so, what do we say yes to? What do we say no to? What are kind of the downstream effects? So those are two resources that I really like. I do write on AI, but a lot of other things too as it relates to technology and parenting. So I'm always kind of updating with best resources there and different ideas. So I appreciate you sending people to my site there. For any teachers or administrators who are going, "Ooh, what do we need to do? How do we need to handle cell phones and all of these things?" You can contact me through Substack. I do some uh, consulting for schools on that front too, so I'm happy to kind of touch base there. There it feels like almost every single day there is new articles and publications coming out talking about the dangers of all these things for kids,
Hmm
especially for our youngest kids. So I think taking the time to really educate that and just to draw that fine line between being familiar and comfortable with something doesn't make you an expert at it.
Hmm.
Just because you feel like you can pick up an iPad doesn't mean you know how to use a computer. So parents just thinking about it differently and thinking more about that skill development too is super important.
Yeah. Great advice. Thank you so much, Emily, for taking the time to be on the No White podcast today.
Oh, thank you so much, Liberty. I'm so glad we got to chat.